I clutched my phone as I stood on the coastal villa's porch. The words flashed on the screen. Anger roiled deep inside my chest. Dad, I take it that you did what you wanted to do? With a quivering voice, I spoke. I could hear my father's breathing on the other end of the telephone. Margaret, Daniel, I assumed you would comprehend. Diana is in need of cash. It is only normal for family members to support one another if we are unable to pay off the loan. I smiled bitterly at what he said. The typical family card, eh? My name is Margaret Moore. This had always been the case with my parents, who loved my sister Diana, who was 2 years younger. My 5th birthday is the earliest recollection I have. When my parents gave me the red bicycle I had been wanting, I was ecstatic, but my joy was short-lived. The bike caught Diana's attention, and she quickly claimed it as her own. Don't you think Diana wants it? Since you are the older sister, give it to her. The bike eventually belonged to Diana. Despite being a birthday present, my little complaint was ignored. I had the same thing when I started elementary school. Diana was drawn to the pencil case I got as a present for starting school. I was eventually forced to change to a new one. My mother, who consistently complied with Diana's requests, stated, "Diana is still young, so she wants what you have." Diana was the focus of extracurricular activities as well. My parents instantly shut it down when I mentioned that I wanted to take swimming lessons. Diana's piano lessons are costing us money. In addition, Diana would experience loneliness if she were alone. Diana didn't care about money for her art, dancing, or piano endeavors. In the meanwhile, I was only permitted to participate in school groups. I was often advised to help Diana with her studies when I finished my schoolwork, and wanted to go out and play. Diana's school activities were attended by both of our parents, but they always stated, "We are too busy at work," when it came to mine. Even on sports day, when I won a race, no one paid attention since Diana had fallen and was weeping. I spoke as class president on an open school day, but my parents didn't come since they were at Diana's event. In 6th grade, I was voted class representative, but I didn't even inform my parents about it. I was aware that the topic would eventually return to Diana. My 3rd year of high school is what I remember the most. I put a lot of effort into getting admitted to my top institution, but my parents didn't seem to care. Indifferently, my mother remarked, "Oh, that's nice. I'm more curious about Diana's performance on the practice exam." My mother prepared all of Diana's favorite meals for supper that night. It was meant to be a celebration of my accomplishment, but Diana was the subject of every conversation. No one appreciated my efforts or happiness. Diana usually got pricey presents at Christmas, while I always got useful things like clothes or stationery. Since the funds were required for Diana's piano lessons, even the travel costs for my club contests were turned down. Diana is sensitive. Diana is sensitive. I had fully given up on my relationship with my family by the time I started college. I met Ken at the windsurfing club about this time. I was a complete novice and a freshman, always at the mercy of the waves. Conversely, Ken was the club captain and older than I was. I was repeatedly tossed into the sea on the first practice day. My eyes ached so badly that I gulped some salt water. I was ready to give up when Ken reached out to shake my hand. "This is how everyone begins," he remarked. When I was a freshman, I also fell all day long. I can't express how much I was saved by their words. I had hardly ever encountered generosity in the face of failure until that point. On the last day of our training camp, there was an especially noteworthy incident. I was by myself, fighting the surf at dark. This was my final opportunity to get up because I hadn't been able to do it once that day. "The wind is changing, Margaret," Ken yelled from the beach. Everything instantly became evident to me as soon as I heard his voice, the board's feel, the direction of the wind, and the movement of the waves. I was standing on the waves before I realized it. I succeeded! While my colleagues applauded, all I could see was Ken's dazzling smile. Ken gently told me not to become nervous on the board. Move with the waves by feeling them. Those remarks struck a deep chord with me for some reason. I had never been so well cared for by anyone. My parents didn't care much about my efforts or accomplishments. They were always preoccupied with Diana. Ken told me, "Margaret, you're talented. You have incredible wave-reading intuition." I was drawn to him not just because of his technical advice, but also because of his warmth and his occasionally mischievous looks. We began dating a few months later. We made the decision to turn our love of maritime sports into a business and launched an import firm when I graduated from college. Those in our immediate vicinity opposed it. The notion was met with tremendous opposition, especially from my parents. To raise the initial funds, we put in a lot of effort. While Ken borrowed money from his family, I worked 3 part-time jobs. The closest station was 30 minutes walk away from our initial workplace, a little flat. Every piece of furniture, including desks and cabinets, was used. I chuckled along with Ken as he stated, "This is our starting line." It was much harder than we thought to find business partners. You're not old enough. You have no history. Even though we were repeatedly turned down, we persisted. We developed contacts with sportsmen, went to maritime sports competitions, and eventually gained their trust. Meeting a tiny Australian company was a turning point in our journey. Additionally, they had only recently begun operations and aimed to enter the American market. Maybe they were moved by our enthusiasm, and we were able to land a deal as an exclusive distributor. We celebrated signing the contract in our workplace with canned snacks and a cheap bottle of sparkling wine. We discussed our future. Now that I think about it, that may have been the real start of our adventure. My father questioned, "How do you intend to survive with such an unstable business?" My mother remarked, "Diana is struggling, so you need to help the family." With Diana still taking up all of her thoughts. Diana, my younger sister, had left college, worked part-time jobs, and spent her days having fun without a purpose. My parents took over to clean up after her each time she accrued debt. Calling her a disadvantaged child, they consistently stood up for her. On the other hand, they had me meet rigorous requirements. Ken, however, was unique. He was prepared to accompany me on my journey and had faith in my aspirations. He declared, "If it's us, we can make it happen." I carried those comments close to my heart as we expanded our business one step at a time. The company, which started out in a little warehouse, is now well known in its field. And we finally realized our ambition of acquiring a vacation house 5 years ago. Not long after we started looking, we discovered this property. We were immediately enthralled by the stunning view of the ocean from this tree-lined hilltop location. Ken said, "This is the one," and I was thinking the same thing. Once more, my parents were against it. They argued that spending so much money on such a luxury was unnecessary. However, the money wasn't the only reason for their displeasure. My work was still not entirely acknowledged by them. But I didn't care about that. This demonstrated that the dream Ken and I had created together was real. When we arrived to the vacation house for the first time, as we listened to the sound of the waves, we sat on the balcony and looked up at the starry sky. My hand was held by Ken. "Margaret, let's grow old together here." Even now, such words bring me joy. But with just one phone conversation from my father, everything began to fall apart. I had just returned from a business trip to Southeast Asia, and it was the morning of the second day. I was at the holiday house. My father remarked, "Margaret, I need to talk to you," in a tone that was a little too confident. "Did something happen?" I inquired informally. I had no clue at the time that I would be so abruptly brought back to the harsh realities of life. As soon as my father started saying, "It's about your vacation home," I felt uneasy. The vacation house? How about it? I've sold it already. Next month, the ownership transfer will occur. I was momentarily unable to understand what he was saying. Transfer? Sale? Our cherished vacation residence? What are you discussing? My voice faltered. Diana is having issues. With an excuse-sounding tone, my father added, she lost money on an investment and now owes $200,000. And what does that have to do with our vacation home? My chest blazed with anger. I assumed you would understand, Margaret. Diana is in need of cash. Should we fail to assist the collectors? You went ahead and did whatever you wanted, didn't you? I spoke in a cold tone. I strengthened my hold on the balcony railing. My father's tone became more adamant as he stated, you hardly ever use the vacation house. Is a vacation home you rarely use more important than your sister's life? That's Diana's problem, I answered, trying to maintain a firm voice despite my shaking. To sell the vacation home without our consent, how did you even manage to proceed with the sale? I could feel my father hesitating for a second. The paperwork was ready, and I had your signatures. You made them up. As the seriousness of my parents' behavior started to set in, my pulse raced. Hear me out, Margaret. Diana is not to blame. She was simply duped. This is a criminal offense. Fraud is an unlawful sale, I said icily. I'm contacting the police. On the other end of the telephone, I heard my dad gasp. Police? Avoid being absurd. How is it possible to take a family issue outside? No, this goes beyond family issues. With a firm grasp on the railing, I exclaimed, it's a crime. Dad, Mom, it's time you stopped cleaning up Diana's messes. The vacation house Ken and I had saved so diligently for over the years sprawled out in front of me. We shared our dreams for the future there while we looked at the sky, windsurfed and dreamt. Margaret, don't we feel like family? Family is about supporting one another, my father said, his voice taking on a desperate tone. I sighed deeply and answered, yes, we're family, which is why I have to report you and Mom for fraud. Only the sound of the waves could be heard as I hung up. My red cheeks were cooled by the briny wind. It was unbelievable to me that my parents had fallen to this level. At last, their perverted love to Diana had gone too far. Maybe I should have stopped them sooner, but I couldn't take it any longer. After putting my phone in my pocket, I went back inside the vacation house. My phone rang once more an hour later. It was Ken this time. Margaret, are you okay? I felt a little more at ease after hearing his voice. Yes, I just finished talking to my father. I got a call from the potential buyer, Ken stated calmly. As it happens, they're a younger buddy of mine from college. They grasped the problem right away when I described it to them. The transaction has been canceled. I exhaled deeply in relief. That was at least one issue resolved. Thank you, Ken. I also received a message from the police. Your parents' falsified paperwork were discovered. My chest constricted at his words. Mom and Dad, how far are you willing to fall? Later that night, Ken arrived at the vacation house. He had gone to check on me out of care, even in the middle of his shift. His kind voice gave me much-needed consolation as he questioned, "Are you okay?" Ken held me tenderly in his arms. At last, the tears I had been suppressing came out. Why? Why would they act in this way? As long as it's for Diana, do they believe they can do anything? Margaret, Ken said quietly, stroking my hair, you haven't done anything wrong. Actually, I'm proud of you for refusing to back down. My heart was filled with those words. The police began a full-scale inquiry the next day. On suspicion of attempting to commit fraud, my parents were questioned. I didn't answer when my mother called me again and over. It has been a week since then. We watched the sunset over the water from the veranda of the vacation house. My heart was calmed by the sound of the waves lapping on the coast. Ken whispered, "I recall the day we discovered this location. I also recalled the day we took a tour of the property. Despite the age of the house, we made a decision immediately. Repairing it got ingrained in our memory. We remodeled the kitchen, changed the floors, and painted the railings. The two of us completed all of the job. We had disagreements occasionally, but even those times now seem nostalgic." "Margaret," said Ken, taking my hand, "we're all in this together. We will work together to overcome any obstacles that may arise." I gave a nod. It's all right if my connection with my parents never gets back to how it was. Our is our lives, our decisions, and our beachfront vacation house is evidence of our love for one another. The police probe, however, moved somewhat gradually. As events transpired, further information on my parents' behavior emerged. They went forward with the transaction, even though they knew from the start that Ken and I shared ownership of the property. The document fabrication was well organized. It was discovered that they had given the potential buyer misleading information while they were explaining things. For 3 months, they had been getting ready for this. They first faked my signature, then they expertly mimicked Ken's signature to provide the real estate agent a fake agreement of sale. "Our daughter and her partner are being relocated overseas and are unable to manage the property," they falsely claimed. The fact that my mother had circulated rumors across the neighborhood was the most startling discovery. She asserted that we are being forced to pay off debts that Margaret and her husband accrued. To keep Diana safe, she was prepared to damage the reputation of her own daughter. Diana fell for a scam involving investments. During the police interrogation, my mother apparently made an emotional confession. At first, it was just intended to be $10,000, but before we knew it, it had grown to $200,000. To pay off the loan, my parents had depleted their resources and sold off land. They attempted to sell our vacation house in order to make up the difference, because even that wasn't enough. "Diana isn't to blame," my mother said as I was being questioned. "She was simply duped. She lacks Margaret's intelligence. Even the interrogating officer was reportedly rendered incoherent by her remarks." My feelings were conflicted. It was hard for me to comprehend that my own parents had gone to such lengths. Then Diana got in touch with me one day. "Sis, how could you have done this? It is awful to turn our parents over to the police." Her victim mentality was still very much alive. I answered coolly. "Diana, are you aware that in order to pay off your debt, they attempted to sell the vacation house Ken and I treasure? That is illegal." "But we're family, aren't we?" "I'm having a lot of trouble here. You need to start accepting accountability for your deeds. I finished tidying up after you." I was overcome with exhaustion once I hung up. Diana had been pampered by our parents since she was a little child, whereas I worked hard at my profession and studied hard. Diana had a careless life and depended on our parents to save her each time she failed. I couldn't remember how many times Diana had accrued debt. It all began when she took out a student loan in her first year of college. It started out as a little payment from a consumer lending company, $3,000. Why? To accompany buddies on a luxury brand buying excursion. My parents paid off the bill right away and accepted her actions, stating, "She's just a young girl. It can't be helped," rather than reprimanding her. We found that she had embezzled her tuition funds 2 months later. It had been used for new clothes and trips with friends. To make up the $30,000 difference, my father took money out of his savings. They said, "Diana lacks life experience. It's natural she doesn't understand the value of money." My parents made reasons to justify her instead of scolding her. Diana unexpectedly declared she was leaving college in her 3rd year. Why? "I can't keep up with the classes." She started working part-time in a restaurant shortly after. She began dating a client there. She eventually lost $38,000 when he introduced her to an investment program. Diana glared at me as though I were the issue and added, "You wouldn't understand, Margaret, because you're so smart." "He's the only one I have." My parents were able to convince her to end her relationship with him after pleading with her. However, they settled her obligation once again. They had almost exhausted their retirement funds, and now Diana had racked up $200,000 in debt after falling for yet another scam. My parents had to sell our vacation house since they were out of money to pay for it this time. I had often said, "They spoiled her too much," but my mother would only shake her head. "Diana is a delicate young woman. We must keep her safe." Diana was being destroyed by my parents' overindulgent attachment to her. She repeatedly made the same mistakes and insisted that I'm the victim, demonstrating a lack of personal accountability. My parents strongly opposed my decision to launch my own company. "You should just join a stable company," they said. "You need to be responsible for Diana too." However, I was already free of that curse. I had started on my own journey with Ken as my partner and ally. Nevertheless, my parents attempted to remove the location that held great significance for us. To the best of my knowledge, the total debt ultimately surpassed $400,000. My parents would always respond, "Diana isn't at fault," while continuing to clean up Diana's trash and defend her as the poor girl. Simply said, society is too cruel. "Margaret, you're fortunate, therefore you ought to assist." Now, those words reverberated with a hint of bitter irony. Ultimately, my parents spoiled Diana, ruining her life, and now they were attempting to ruin ours. "Maybe they never really accepted what we do for a living," Ken stated gravely. He was correct. Their attempt to sell the vacation house was only a continuation of their ignorance. Maybe that's why they decided to get away with something we valued so quickly. I firmly stated, "But that's their problem. Our bond is something no one can break." Ken gave a soft smile. I was constantly strengthened by that smile. We followed our own route. That was demonstrated by the memories carved into this vacation house. The waves gradually became rougher as October drew in. We watched the sunset over the water while seated close to one another on the deck. I knew that my relationship with Diana and my parents would never be the same again. But I made the decision to do so. With the arrival of winter came the last police report. After being charged, my parents were given a suspended sentence. Without reading their letters of apologies, I threw them away. I had learned that sometimes forgiveness merely makes wrongdoing more likely to happen again. It has been a year since then. My parents are still having trouble paying back their loans, according to a neighbor who talked to my mother's acquaintance. My father was forced to quit his work when the illegal sale of the vacation house was revealed. My mother now works 3 part-time jobs: packaging at a food plant during the day, operating the register at a 24-hour supermarket at night, and working early mornings at a warehouse. Near the grocery store register where my mother worked, I heard a woman chatting. "I heard the Moores are having a tough time," she said. "She has shed a lot of weight. My parents and Diana currently reside in an inexpensive apartment on the outskirts of town after their family house was previously sold. All of their money, including their retirement savings, was spent, so they took on additional debt to settle Diana's." "Margaret, can't you help your parents?" Whenever relatives phoned me with the same query, I would always respond with the same response. They'll have to solve their problems on their own. Diana is still the same. She is now thinking about another investment plan after meeting a man at a nightclub. It is infallible this time. I will undoubtedly earn money. Diana reacted violently when my parents attempted to stop her. "You're behaving so heartless like Margaret when I'm having a hard time. Please assist me." However, my parents were no longer able to provide for Diana. Their monthly repayments were becoming more difficult to keep up with. My father had started working weekends non-stop as a night watchman. My mother couldn't afford to be fussy, so she spent her days searching the grocery store sales for deals. Although she was once spotted sobbing by herself on the side of the road late at night, neighbors claimed that Diana, upset by my parents' desertion, focused all of her rage on me. "You are solely to blame, sis. Everything was wrecked when you reported them to the police. Simply selling that dumb vacation house would have taken care of everything." My mother and I met up at the grocery store one day. She had changed. Her back was bent, and her hair was now white. She scurried away from me as soon as our eyes locked. She had a shopping basket full with cheap food products that were about to expire. Meanwhile, it has been claimed that my father passed out while working a late-night security shift. Overwork was the diagnosis. Nevertheless, knowing that the collection calls would never end if they fell behind on payments, he went back to work without taking any breaks. Diana sent me an email at the end of the year. "Grant me $50,000, Margaret. I swear that I can use it to change everything." Her consumer loans were fully used. She couldn't use her credit cards. No friends or acquaintances were left to provide her a hand. Diana was in a tight spot and was looking to me for support. I didn't respond. Rather, I forwarded information on debt relief and therapy to my parents. I could do no more for them than that. Why didn't we realize what was happening before it got this bad? My heart ached at what my mother's friend had said. However, my parents had decided on this course. In the end, their heedless devotion to Diana had destroyed the whole family. I looked out at the water and let out a long sigh. Ken approached me from behind at night and put his arms over my shoulders. "You're not at fault," he acknowledged. I gave his remarks a silent nod. My decision had been the right one. Although unpleasant, the choice was essential. "I've been thinking," Ken remarked, his face grave. "What if we use this vacation home as a venue for charity events?" "Charity?" I inquired. "Yes. Let's make maritime sports accessible to impoverished children." His proposal affected me greatly. I wanted to help kids who felt the same loneliness since I had seen what it was like to be misinterpreted by my own family. I remarked, "That's a wonderful idea," Ken went on. "To us, this property is a place of dreams, but to your parents, it was just a piece of real estate. If only we could tell others about that dream." I took hold of his hand. Ken always had a great understanding of my innermost feelings. "Let's do it," I responded resolutely. We put in our wetsuits. My enjoyment was pure as I rode the waves. Yes, I had lost contact with my original family, but I had made a decision that wasn't a mistake. We gazed toward the future while listening to the sound of the waves. In addition to continuing to foster our aspirations, our vacation house would now serve as a haven of hope for those who are pursuing their own goals.
A turning moment in my life was that balmy spring morning. When I was 4 years old, I liked the smell of my father's pancakes when I woke up on Sunday mornings. Every time, he would make us special pancakes. He lavishly topped them with whipped cream and maple syrup, and fashioned them into forms like bears, bunnies, and occasionally even my favorite Mickey Mouse. My mother would be humming a song while she laid the table in the kitchen. I held my beloved plush rabbit Lucy, while I waited for breakfast to be served on the sofa in the living room. "The pancakes say they want you to flip them, not me," my father said, echoing from the kitchen. "They claim that when you do that, they taste better." He held a cooking pan and used the spatula as a magic wand. Laughing, I sprung off the couch, set my bunny down, and ran to the kitchen. All of that changed at that instant. With a clang, the spatula dropped to the ground. My mother's cries filled the air as my father fell to the ground, his face twisted in agony, his hands gripping his chest. "Honey, stay with me." What came next is a haze in my mind. The siren of an ambulance, my mother sobbing in the hospital's antiseptic white hallway, and the picture of my father, who would never come back. My mother was overcome with sadness upon his passing. Days filled with sighs and sorrow eclipsed the once vibrant and cheerful lady she was. I was powerless to alleviate her grief at 4. I was afraid to leave her alone, so all I could do was watch from her side. I was only able to gently hold her sleeve with my little hand each time she broke down. Even when I was younger, the gloomy, heavy air that pervaded our house waited ruthlessly. After a year, there was no more laughing in our house. Wayne worked at a single-parent support group where my mother met him. At first, his smile, which resembled me a little of my father, unnerved me. Like my father, he had smiled calmly that day before passing out in front of me. A constriction seized my chest each time I recalled my helplessness. Wayne's friendliness looked so natural that I had to balance my intuitive caution against wanting to trust in him every time I saw his grin, as though there may be something sinister lurking underneath it. But Wayne was really a kind person. His generosity came easily to people around him. It wasn't pushed. I was aloof at first, but as I witnessed how he looked after my frail mother and tried to make our family happy again, I gradually warmed up to him. Wayne and my mother's connection soon developed, and they were married. Wayne made the perfect stepfather. He constantly went to school functions, genuinely cared about my education, and even recorded me waving through the crowd during sporting events. His statement, "Lucy, the sky is the limit for your future," gave me confidence. When I was scared to go outside, his words were like magic, softly urging me on. His remarks gave me the confidence to gradually attempt new things. My mother had some very important news to give within a year of their wedding. She was expecting Wayne's kid. Happiness lighted up her face. For the first time in a long time, her voice was full of energy as she declared, "Lucy, you're going to be a big sister." Even though I couldn't speak at the time, I couldn't help but grin at the excitement and optimism in my mother's eyes. The air appeared to gently warm up around us, but I had no idea what this new life would bring. I was determined to help my mother, and I felt a little more mature. At the same time, though, a tinge of nervousness appeared in my heart. There was more change than expected when Ted arrived. I had just turned 6 at the time. At first, I liked to assist with the baby's care. I can still clearly recall Ted's first smile and the sensation of his small hand on my finger. But with time, my mother's alterations became noticeable. She first resigned from her position as a teacher at an elementary school. "I wanted to spend more time with my family," she explained. My mother's response to everyone who questioned her choice was always, "This time is crucial for a child's development." Wasn't my childhood important too? Was a question I frequently longed to ask Mom. She seemed to be always occupied with Ted, which made me feel lonely and envious. Ted became more and more central to my mother's universe. She didn't remember my school activities. She would say she was sorry for lunch. "Sorry, Lucy. I had to make a doctor's appointment for Ted today, so I didn't have time to prepare anything." Ted was even the topic of talk during dinner. It became our new normal and wasn't an isolated incident. The only person who noticed was Wayne. As I saw my mother get absorbed in Ted, he noticed the lonely look on my face. I gradually disappeared from my mother's sight. Wayne joined me one evening as I was working alone on my schoolwork. "Lucy, you see," he said softly, gesturing to a mathematical puzzle. "Sometimes people get so focused on one thing that they can't see other important things around them." The problems in our home atmosphere became more obvious as Ted became older. Wayne made many attempts to bring up Ted's too strong bond with my mother, but she consistently grew defensive and irate. Ted was approximately 5 years old when he was playing with his food one evening over supper, moving it around his plate. "Don't play with your food," my mother gently recommended as she sat next to him. "How about another bite, Sandra?" Wayne remarked, setting down his fork. "You've been too preoccupied with looking after Ted recently. He's 5 years old already. He needs to start taking care of himself." Immediately, my mother's face stiffened. "What does that mean to you? Do you think I'm a horrible mom?" Her voice faltered. "You're more than simply Ted's dad. You also have a spouse, myself, and a daughter, Lucy. Would you maybe give Lucy and I a bit more of your attention as well? Wayne gently answered. I listened to their chat without missing a word while pretending to be absorbed in my mashed potatoes. Ted is still quite little. My mother said, a child needs their mother. I said to myself, I'm still just a grade schooler, but it didn't seem like anyone could hear. When Wayne proposed that Ted take judo training while feigning to complete his schoolwork on the stairs, it was the tipping point in my relationship with my mother. They argued in the kitchen, and I heard everything. Absolutely not. My mom's voice became high-pitched. Are you aware of judo's potential for harm? He may break a bone or injure his ankle. It's for Ted's sake, Sandra, Wayne stated with fatigue. Parents are unable to shield their kids from every danger. It's crucial that they study and experience different things because of this. Ted was not permitted to join judo by my mother. Rather, she signed him up for a class on city painting. I can still recall those times. Ted moved his brush idly as other children painted with earnestness. After just 3 sessions, he left, and my mother accused the professors of failing to see her son's potential. Wayne spent more time with me during this period, either in an attempt to counteract my mother's actions or just because he felt bad about viewing me as a child in need of a mother. 3 times a week, he took me to karate sessions. He celebrated louder than any other parent whenever I got a new belt. But the more I was protected by Wayne, the more rambunctious Ted got. Toys and clothing littered his room. Lucy, please, could you clean up Ted's room? My mother asked me one day as she glanced at me. Since I knew these pleas were really orders, I was growing more and more irritated of them. When Wayne learned about this interaction, he became enraged. He objected, saying, Sandra, Lucy is not her brother's maid. Ted needs to learn to clean up after himself. My mother broke down in tears as she played her last card. She cried, You prefer your daughter, don't you? Why are you so cold to Ted? Wayne's countenance clouded over as I noticed. I sensed his dissatisfaction with my mom. After giving me a regretful look, he lifted his hands in submission. All right, have it your way. He stopped arguing with my mother about Ted after that, but I could tell he loved me by the way he looked at me. He may have stopped talking to my mother about Ted's childhood, but he had not stopped talking about me. It was a tiny hope, but hope may sometimes save a life. It was bittersweet for me to graduate from high school. I put on my gown and hat and looked over the throng for Wayne. My mother was undoubtedly messaging Ted's babysitter, but he was grinning triumphantly. She must have been too worried about finding a sitter for him. She never once glanced at me. Wayne summoned me to his study that night. He started, I've been saving for your future, and produced a folder full of university brochures. Lucy, there are countless options for your future. Make an informed college choice. My mother interrupted before I could reply. I will not permit it, she said. That money should be saved for Ted's future. Wayne's expression grew stern. I had seen that look a lot while they were fighting. Sandra, this cannot be negotiated. I've made up my mind already. I'll make your daughter happy if you can't, he said forcefully. In the end, I decided on an institution that was far from home, but yet accessible via occasional visit. I moved into my flat with Wayne's aid. My mother did not show up on the day of the relocation. Ted was worried about my moving out, she claimed. The college experience fulfilled all of my dreams. I had the opportunity to finally discover who I was and get out of the shadow of being an unwanted child by going to college. Wayne and I spoke most of the time, but I made sure to phone home once a week. My mother hardly ever had time for a meaningful conversation with me since she was constantly too occupied with Ted. I was so engrossed in the pleasures of college life at the time that I failed to see the ominous clouds looming over our family. I first became aware of Wayne's transformation during my sophomore year. He didn't always answer the phone, and our weekend calls grew shorter. I initially assumed he was simply preoccupied with his job, but the reality was far more dire. My mother called one day in a panic. In Wayne's desk drawer, she had inadvertently discovered many debt collection notes. All of the debts were from gaming, and the sum was startlingly high. My mother had not been aware of the issue since she had been too busy taking care of Ted. Wayne acknowledged that he had lost a significant amount of money gambling when I challenged him. Shortly after Ted's birth, he had begun gambling. At first, Dad used it as a small-scale stress reduction strategy for his relationship with my mother. It had, however, developed into a significant gambling addiction. "Lucy, please do something." My mom's voice faltered. "The interest has grown, and it's become more than we can pay back." I thought of skipping school right away, but Wayne was adamantly against it. I started gambling, which led to this catastrophe. "Your life cannot be ruined by my troubles." He wept on the phone. "I'll take care of it." However, gambling addiction is a difficult condition to overcome on one's own. Wayne had been there for me since I was a youngster, and I considered what I could do for him. I started conserving money, reduced spending, and took on more part-time jobs while I was still in school. In addition, I made a recovery plan for Wayne, spoke with a gambling addiction specialist, and arranged for him to join a support group and treatment program. Above all, we set up a method for managing finances. We established a rigorous budgeting system with the help of a money management consultant. I assumed responsibility for the home money, and Wayne was only permitted to carry tiny sums of cash. Addiction to gambling was not easily overcome. Wayne appeared to lose hope at times and came dangerously close to relapsing on other occasions. But he made steady improvement with our family's help and his own determination. Wayne was able to quit gambling entirely 2 years later. Our relationship was greatly enhanced by this encounter. He began to view me as his own daughter, not merely the daughter of his remarried husband. But the good times were short-lived. Wayne was sent to the hospital after becoming unwell one day. The malignancy was determined to be terminal. Our days were full with uncertainty after that. We hardly had time to say farewell because his fight with the disease was short. I still recall being so helpless since all I could do was observe from his bedside. His health unexpectedly deteriorated, and I was unable to witness his last moments. "Lucy, you are my pride," he remarked, holding my hand just weeks before Dad passed away. "I was saved by you. Thank you very much." Wayne's passing left our family in a dark place. My heart filled with regret and sadness, and even after all this time, there was still a huge void. Nevertheless, I started to try to proceed. I worked evenings at a cafe to gain scholarships and read diligently in the library during the day to keep my grades up during college. This effort paid off, and in my final year of college, around 2 years after Wayne's passing, I was hired by a prestigious corporation. After my accomplishments and job experience were acknowledged by the organization, I was able to progressively build and solidify my career. I was able to purchase my own apartment by the time I was 27. However, my mother fell into a deep depression once more, and it seemed that her fixation with Ted was getting worse. Then, a few years after Wayne's passing, I learned that my grandpa had died at the house where my mother grew up. My grandfather's will was discovered during the inheritance processes. Unexpectedly, Ted was to inherit all of his possessions, according to the will. It turned out that my mother had discreetly requested that my grandfather draft this will before his passing, demonstrating the extent of her family's fortune. With his enormous riches, my grandpa had been one of the area's most prominent real estate tycoons. He was a traditionalist who thought male descendants should inherit the family estate. However, Dad really adored and indulged my mother because she was the only daughter. She had requested that he do this. My grandfather's attorney called me one day to tell me that my grandfather had left everything to Ted in his will. For me, nothing remained. I questioned my mother. Why? "You can succeed on your own since you're talented, right? Ted need a unique setting. His future is safe with this fortune," she said icily. But the truth was far different from what my mother had anticipated. Ted had never understood the value of money since he had been spoiled from birth. Ted spent money carelessly, using fake credit cards in my mother's name to purchase video games, powerful gaming PCs, and computer accessories. He also indulged in online gaming and spending sprees with pals he made at school. In order to demonstrate his position, he also dabbled in premium goods and developed an obsession with putting together ostentatious outfits and accessories. He'd eventually dabbled in real estate investing despite having no prior business or life expertise. He was readily duped by dishonest local salesmen who targeted him with their phony investment ideas. He was convinced to purchase expensive real estate, which created openings in neighborhoods with a large number of vacant homes. Far from turning a profit, he struggled to make monthly payments, and in just 2 years, the enormous bequest had been spent, and he had accrued a sizable debt. The days of fighting to pay back debts persisted, and he felt more and more alone as people who might help him got fewer and farther between. After learning of Ted's financial difficulties brought on by his extravagant spending, I made the decision to go it alone. After that, my mother called me one Tuesday night. A woman who appeared to be 20 years older than she actually was standing in front of me when I visited. The mother I knew was no longer there. She looked exhausted and had lost her old glitz. Her face was deeply wrinkled, and her thinning arms bore the remnants of once glamorous rings. My mother and brother had reportedly started a new life after Wayne's passing by moving into the home where my grandfather had resided. My mother replied, "The house is a bit messy," with a hint of regret. Messy was a very strong word. Old stains were noticeable on the walls, and it was possible that the expensive furnishings had been sold and replaced with less expensive options. The sink was piled high with soiled dishes. Once renowned for its impeccable cleanliness, the home was now in danger of falling into disrepair. "Mom, what happened?" My mother spoke without making eye contact. "Ted made some mistakes in real estate investment, but there's a new investment opportunity, and if that goes well..." I couldn't resist grinning. Was he defrauded once more? How did Grandpa's inheritance turn out? Ted is still young, right? Did you fail to stop him? He simply had faith in the possibilities. He was duped by everyone else. We are not to blame. The pitch of my mother's voice increased. The standard justification started. Now I heard the hollowness in my mother's voice as she defended Ted. While she was making excuses, I noticed the light in Ted's room through the window. His game screen was clearly flickering. My mother finally got to the point. "Lucy, please, we need your help," she said in a quivering voice. "If this keeps up, we will lose the house. You're currently employed by a reputable corporation, correct? Even the mortgage payment each month." Even though I knew what she wanted to say, I couldn't quite put it into words. I kept opening my mouth to speak. A part of me felt bad because I couldn't say no. Ultimately, I quietly established a $1,000 monthly deposit to my mother's account. I kept convincing myself that it was the right thing to do, even if it meant depleting my future savings. However, there were moments when I thought I was giving up on my goals and aspirations. Anxiety rose inside me as I pondered how long this predicament would last. However, rather than getting better, things got worse. The presence of Ashley, Ted's girlfriend, was the final straw. She moved in with my parents and remained with Ted, even after he had accumulated enormous debt. She consumed all of the pricey international wine I had purchased, leaving the empty bottles unopened. The prepared dishes and Tupperware she purchased from the grocery were left unwashed and strewn all over the table and sink. Her haughty demeanor appeared to make fun of my attempts. She refused to even glance up as I set down the items I had purchased. She simply reclined on the last remaining plush sofa in the house and kept browsing through her phone. "You're living here on my money. At least assist with the tasks if you plan to remain." I spoke louder. Ashley didn't even care that my mother's lifestyle was being supported by the monthly money I provided her. Ashley raised her head slowly and gave a bitter smirk. "Well, Lucy, your brother Ted has given me permission to be here. After all, his grandpa was the original owner of this mansion. Why should I do the housework? You can hire a maid or do them yourself if necessary, right? Aren't you the one with the highest income?" The last straw was what she said. Yes, this mansion was in Ted's name and was constructed on the fortune my grandpa had amassed. I had been attempting to win my mother's affection by making excuses ever since my father passed away when I was 4 years old. I worked tirelessly to restore our family and assisted Wayne in his recuperation. But ultimately, what was the point of all my work? I was only a handy maid who could make money, in their opinion. Silently, I got up and walked out of the room. Ashley's jubilant laughter reverberated across the corridor. I was clutching the steering wheel almost subconsciously throughout the 4 hours that I drove from my mother's house to my flat. I sat down on the couch when I got to my flat and used the bank's website to send money to my mom. In the end, I made up my mind. As anticipated, a month later, my mother called. "What's wrong, Lucy? The funds have not yet been moved." "Yes, I decided to stop sending money." "What? What did you say?" The tone of my mom's voice changed. "Who do you think raised you to this point?" "Mom," I said coolly, "what have you ever done for me?" Ted was given Grandpa's whole estate. Kept spoiling Ted while Wayne worked to reestablish our family? My mother screamed, "You're simply possessive." Remember how I said Ted needed a unique setting? Without me, you grew up perfectly. You've remained the same. I said, "Goodbye, Mom," instantly hung up and blocked my mom's number. My mother, however, persisted. A cold daughter who tramples on her poor mother's heart. A sister who can't understand her delicate brother's struggles. And other comments were sent by her via messenger, email, and friends. In keeping with my mother's penchant for them, the excuses were masterfully written. After losing my financial assistance, my mother and brother battled to make ends meet for 6 months before having to sell Grandpa's house and move into a smaller apartment. Despite having a teaching license, my mother struggled to get a teaching position and was working numerous jobs to help support the family. However, things didn't get any simpler. Despite taking part-time employment, Ted struggled to maintain them and was in pain. His attempts to rely on old acquaintances were in vain since those friendships, which were mostly based on money, did not provide any genuine trust, and he was frequently rejected with the icy response, "I can't right now." After their breakup after the selling of Grandpa's house, Ashley, Ted's ex-girlfriend, moved out and lived alone in a little apartment. Unable to let go of her former way of life, she kept purchasing upscale items, accruing debt, and her apartment became disorganized, which made her life lonely because no one came to visit. I am unable to assist them, even if they are in a difficult circumstance. I don't think it's related to me. I have the right to live my own life. Blood isn't the only factor that defines family bonds. Distance must occasionally be established in order to protect oneself. During his period in rehabilitation from his gambling addiction, Wayne famously remarked, "Sometimes people need to hit rock bottom to change." I now have a clear understanding of what those terms signify. I can't do anything for Ted and my mother until they take charge of their own life. I keep moving forward, gazing straight ahead. I don't have their problems anymore. I have at last discovered genuine freedom after a protracted battle.